Rae Armantrout and also by Berkeley faculty members. And this evening, Noah Warren is going to introduce Mr. Bowie, Matthew Bowie, and following his short reading, Max Keisler will introduce Rae Armantrout. So please welcome Noah Warren.
Matthew Bowie's poems begin firmly enough. A strong voice beckons us into its scene. It is only after we have entered into their worlds that we understand or are confronted with the pitch of transformation we have acceded to. This is partly an effect of their frequent problematization of seeing. From which window do we look? Is distortion of the horizon or in our eye? Whose gaze don't we meet? We are thrown into worlds hazed or chiaroscuroed with weak red lights that illuminate only themselves, writhing syntax that elides articles and links appositives in long chains, flashes with intense images even as it withholds a stable assembly of those images. At the middle of the poem Tyche Seen in Nakedness, Bowie writes, "We are in the midst of nowhere, in rain no less. The ship wobbles underfoot. No one in red light sees the world has slipped our follow. The first stars are nowhere. They were promised in legion in a dark nowhere seen on land. A storm has stopped that van. Do seas regard purposes, not the seas?" We hear in the welter of such baroque, churning musicality the relentless iteration of the vocable, see. I say vocable because by the end of the passage, the word has been emptied into sound, and as the world has, quote, slipped our follow, has been thinned to a linguistic proposition, as in the midst of nowhere, shrinks to merely a nowhere. Emptied of propositional content, worlds become selves, Manly Hopkins without an exit clause. We hear in these lines, too, the apocalyptic language and the stance of the prophet that deeply structures these poems. Though the prophet negates the present, he does so by offering us alternative temporalities, pasts and futures quickened by moral purpose. Thus we hear these poems, so haunted by an eternally recurrent war, turn characteristically at their ends towards moments of community, past or to come, which, though they may extend the apocalyptic key, offer at least the balm of new seeing and shared experience. Quote, "I am going to war again. You will come with me." Or, quote, "I imagine an impossible California striding after to catch me." And while these poems do, I think, work to scour and trouble our motion through a lay or received or gestalt world, working, that is, to roughen its gloss, a gloss either of daily use or of prefab slickness, while implicating the reader not always gently in such a project. One of their accomplishments is the construction of a compensatory land and soundscape, a restless and mutable zone of rekeying and recombination, where the mind strains to parse what the ear knows. Such a zone in Bowie's poems is dark, difficult, but offered as inhabitable. And though his is a poetics of force, not redemption, I suspect a dwelling there may be one way of washing the scales from our eyes and beginning to tally our complicity. Please welcome Matthew Bowie.
That was awesome. Wow. Okay. This Bowie guy's, I don't know, he knows what he's doing, I guess. So I should note that the occasion, the particular set of poems here is the problem of being a black soldier and a Californian. This is I am going to war again. I am going to war again. You are coming with me. There will be cold breakfasts and metal halls, pilots starving in beds of rats, and what the roaches leave. Where sunrises bend horizons to the sphere, what red lights clicking on to help us see smell like. Unwrapped puncture wounds come in legion, from black paper shown to be just ground, in sky where water drains that grave that gives, where all that die are born again to die again. I am going to war again. You came with me. There were whistles that wake up mornings, till fingers break on lines before they break, and backs to the chill of a coffin rack and safety straps. I am going to war again. You will come with me. This Tyche scene of nakedness. Palermo's tower draws into water. Clouds confuse fog. Coronado. String of silver candles, rails, crown, and sings. Ship's whistle's not a whistle, but a horn. Smashes gray against the gray, deck plate non-skid, eating 300 pairs of boots. Two that never saw a city sink into the sea. We are in the midst of nowhere. In rain, no less. The ship wobbles underfoot, no one in red light sees. The world has slipped our follow. The first stars are nowhere. They were promised in legion, in a dark nowhere seen on land. The storm has stopped that man. To see his regard purposes not at seas. Pelican turns a circle in the sky, horizon drops into the surf, returns. The wheels scream of gull song dips below it after shore. We imagine a shore crude with souls eaten by sierras. I imagine an impossible California striding after to catch me. This is Patronus and the Soldier. I drink rum from a cup beaten out of a tin by an iron crow I met in Malaysia, under towers gnawed at by sunset at the call to prayer. The crow laid its mat for me and said, "Hide beneath to pray, where the sun cannot see you jerk." Poured the rum into the cup. Softly. It tapped the rim of the cup. I asked, "Why do I need to hide to pray?" Iron Crow said, "Because you pray to me, boy. You brought me here to stay." Flew to the bridge across the sun and began to talk to the moon. I could not hear what they said there. The moon still refuses to look me in the eye. The only night I do not drink from the cup is on the new moon in the cities. That's what the nightmare said after Jonah and the Somates. In dream's fury came to me a word, go. Cried the city against me. He paid to flee. Heard the oceans how his tribe was owed. How owed. Was hurled against the writhing wall that broke itself in rising and consumed. Billow broke wave, the mooring hurled the line and blades that cut surf to mountain root and said nothing to the sea. I opened blue, iron plate brow frowning into niggers' hearts. Yoke raised sovereign in his hand. Nemesis, in her lieutenant's bars, quit him the sea. I saw. We were on the cliff when I woke up. It was before reveille and breakfast. The red lights were still lit, some voice crowed from near my coffin rack. All my brothers slept. All my sister was nowhere in the birthing. Left. This is the Negro soldier wakes. You should know that my bedroom in Sacramento, my parents' house, there's like a row of cypress outside the window. It's very strange. I don't like them, but you know, life is what it is. Sometimes my bedroom window roars. going north, full of sunshine, with my wonder who will kill me. I look at the cypress, ask for who could hold the wind-bent trunk and swaying still to tie the news, and pull the half-cut penis fragments from a Cole's inquiry. Did I want war? Did war wake me? Did our only screaming at ourselves say that I have bones to break? Erect a mask of who I am and cast a shadow? No. It was an oak we hung me in. An oak I'll string with entrails, wood smoke hope, and telling tales to war, how sunlight and all speaking, one and only one, north-south freedom. And its kin absolve the sunset of the swaying heels and sing. If I'd hung, what songs I would have sung. Of war. Do you know that it was war and winning wars that said that I may love you? It was war and winning wars that said the nigger is a man, and maybe human too. But still, I'm a nigger. All trees, all screaming, all sin and sunsets like as well will kill me soon. War! And war, and war, and war, and war, and knowing wars resume. There is a row of cypress that the sun bends towards my window every day. I wake from nightmares, but I always think of oak like I'm somewhere else. My estate, this was written on the occasion of returning to California after, war, right? From every open window facing west, I have looked in mourning for war to come home to California. They call me crazy, yes, but I know that he loves us all. No matter what we've said, the 29 pious palms, as much as people's part, hate, Ashbury, the gaslamp temple on the 32nd Street, rows of ash and cherry, on mornings when mourning doves shock them all in sacrament. Oh, coexist stickers too, less well-held beliefs. I have looked into them all, known that he must love us still. War must come home again when morning tips even west into the ocean, toward the world outside the world, some dawn. I am sure he must. I didn't send this one to Noah, but that's all quite apocalyptic, so I'm going to close on something slightly less apocalyptic, right? There are no birds that are blue. Some little birds I have, not named, are friends of mine and gone. A drop of not real blue drops behind a low hill's back, chirps, says no more. Some little birds I have not named are friends of mine and gone. The hill will follow, and the sun, the moon, and you, and no one will say no more. No more. Some little birds I have not named are friends of mine and gone. Fog strung diamonds on spiders web the little birds left, light between wet blades. Some little birds I have not named are friends of mine, and they are gone. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much. My name is Max Keisler, and it's my great pleasure and honor tonight to introduce our Holloway Lecture Series poet, the illustrious Rae Armantrout. For those here tonight who might not know what a privilege we have in store for us, I would be remiss if I did not mention first off a few of the many extraordinary particulars that have characterized her career as a poet over the past several decades. She was born and raised in California, living most of her life in San Diego, and attending school here at UC Berkeley, studying with Denise Levertov, and then San Francisco State University. And now she's taught for over 20 years at the University of California, San Diego. She's one of the founding members of the West Coast Language Poets movement, and she's published multiple widely acclaimed books of poems, including, among many others, Versed, Next Life, Up to Speed, Veil, and Wobble. She was awarded the role of a Guggenheim Fellow in Poetry in 2008, and her book of poems Versed received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 2010. More recently, her book Wobble, a collection of poems, which literary critic Elizabeth Lund called a collection of tight, chiseled poems that forces readers to consider how greed, excess, and lack of critical thought have led to environmental destruction and a nation wobbling toward the edge of collapse. Wobble was a finalist for the 2018 National Book Award in Poetry. So what else can I say about Rae Armantrout? Well, first I'll piggyback on the words of others. Robert Creeley has written that her poems have a quiet and enabling signature. He says, "I don't think there's another poet writing who is so consummate in authority and yet so generous to her readers and company alike." The critic Stephanie Burt writes that William Carlos Williams and Emily Dickinson together taught Armantrout how to dismantle and reassemble the forms of stanzaic lyric, how to turn it inside out and backwards. From these techniques, she's become one of the most recognizable and one of the best poets of her generation. On a personal note, I remember first reading Rae Armantrout's poems right before going to college and thinking to myself two things. First, that her lines and the arrow darts of her poems on the page were so razor sharp, I had the suspicion they were performing a pleasant kind of surgery on me, the opposite effect of anesthesia, as though I were being operated on without the least discomfort, but rather an inquisitive attentiveness to the flash of the knife. And second, I thought to myself, though I'd long despaired of being a poet myself, I was born and raised in San Diego, here was living proof to the contrary. Not the possibility, but the promise of poetry existing in Southern California. Orwell writes, "When one reads any strongly individual piece of writing, one has the impression of seeing a face somewhere behind the page. It is not necessarily the actual face of the writer." I think this is why I felt some trepidation when I learned Rae Armantrout would be reading here this semester and that I'd have the honor of introducing her. As the reader of her work over many years, I've become so used to thinking of the voice of her poems as a kind of disembodied Delphic oracle, by turns riddling and plain-spoken, echoes of a landscape given utterance, twinges of devilish wit. But I'd forgotten the flesh and blood poet who speaks these words, and I'm thrilled to finally hear her voice in the flesh for the first time tonight. For all my misguided imaginings of the voice behind the name Rae Armantrout, I take heart in her own words about her work. She's written, "I think my poetry involves an equal counterweight of assertion and doubt. It's a Cheshire poetics, one that points two ways, then vanishes in the blur of what is seen and what is seeing, what can be known and what it is to know, that double bind." I take this as her invitation tonight to be puzzled, to wonder, to wander, to arrive. Please join me in welcoming Rae Armantrout.
Thank you, Max. Max, another San Diegan. We'll have to talk. All right, I'm going to start by reading a few poems from my latest book, Wobble. And then I'll read some newer work. I read here about, 3 years ago maybe, and I read some of the poems that would be in Wobble. So there are probably, I'm probably, in other words, going to read 3 or 4 poems that I read the last time I stood here, but the rest will be different. This first one I did read, but it may have been before you were here. And it's a prose poem called The Craft Talk. And I wrote it because, of course, I was asked to give a craft talk. And, I have some ideas about the subject. I mean, basically, when you're asked to give a craft talk, you're supposed to talk about your ideas about poetry and what poetry is and what poetry should be. And I have some of those ideas, but I don't have a very high confidence level in my ideas. So this poem kind of makes fun of my own, what I thought I was going to say. The Craft Talk. So that the best thing you could do, it seemed, was climb inside the machine that was language and feel what it wanted or was capable of doing at any point, steering only occasionally. The best thing was to let language speak its piece while standing inside it, not like a knight in armor, exactly, not like a mascot in a chicken suit. The best thing was to create in the reader or listener an uncertainty as to where the voice she heard was coming from, so as to frighten her a little. Why should I want to frighten her? And then this one starts with sort of a plot description of a movie and moves on to a description of an article I read about fracking. Audience. Phlegmatic and unbending, Russell Crowe as Noah teaches us to hold the door against the desperate and the many, threatened by catastrophic climate change, worse than we'd guessed, and more immediate. Are we stowaways? Zipper fracture involves simultaneous stimulation of parallel horizontal wells. Viscoelastic surfactant gel has not been adequately described. Background information. There's a lot going on in the zombie apocalypse, but wouldn't she recognize that her mother was a zombie? I mean, zombies are a thing. The last thing she did was point to one corner of the ceiling with a horrified stare. The nurse called this a seizure, as if words drained experience of content and continued to accumulate. As if words were sealed containers stored for safekeeping. The background is everything that, for now, can be safely ignored. Regime change. We wish, huh? Maybe, but this poem isn't exactly directly about that. Regime change. Equidistant metal roses, metal pinwheels, metal faces at the ends of metal tongs, grimacing. Look at all the time they had to mean. Poets wanted to bounce the leaves, to burn the sun, to modulate the day as the engine noise does not, to replace the bird and replace the bird again in a new way. There are things you will be asked to make note of. You may be asked whether a light is brighter or dimmer than before. Flicker. When it was them, our parents, dying, the way they tried to deny what was happening, the way they were angry at the wrong things, seemed of a piece with the way they'd always been wrong about us, we thought. The way they were wrong about the world, which they saw only through the haze of their own swath of the past, so that it seemed natural for us to scoff, inwardly, even at their deaths. But now it was one of us threatening to get up and walk out of the hospital on his withered legs, sheer sticks, because it was killing him. Clouds of methane rise from dumps outside our city. As I drop a square of soft cheese through a slot into the bin marked landfill. Of course I feel bad about feeling good, about feeling bad about this. But as time speeds up, everything will flicker. Oh, Post-its are not as, okay. Vessels for HD. Hopeful vessels, a few petals thrown up overnight, fragile amber flutes, the sun's grail cups were not meant. Beauty, you've sexted me too often. Your pert leaves coming to a fine point at the glass stop at nothing. If we hear the same sequence twice, then someone's flaunting inner logic. But the wind loose in copper chimes is now far more. I haven't read this aloud for a long time, so we'll see if I can do it right. Object lessons. That a memory caught and mounted for permanent display is not much like anything that happens, can't be surprising. But where does that leave us? Night at the museum. The set pieces, in their comic ignorance of one another, take the stage. In this series, he tosses her on the bed like laundry as she struggles irrelevantly against the stickiness of tape. And it's just this, the blind persistence of her struggle and his feigned indifference, the way each proceeds, blinkered and mechanical, into whatever this recreates. And this one's called Hate. The market hates itself just as much as you hate it. Look, in this spread for leather products, a stern-faced man in pink pants and a bomber jacket stands on satin sheets in front of leopard print wallpaper holding a small briefcase or purse. The market hates you even more than you hate yourself. Okay, and then I'm going to read a few poems from a book that's coming out next year. It's going to be called Now See. Conjure. How did the synthesis cross the abyss? In a sentimental story, there is only one of something, one newborn, one moment, one once embalmed in myrrh. All I want is not to be first on one side, then the other, but to conjure a stream of sounds and images for which I am not responsible, and maneuver within it, mouth and tail, one thought. The sea, now full of cannibal jellies, blue if the sky says so. Pinocchio. Strand, string, in this dream the paths cross and cross again. They are spelling a real boy out of repetition. Each one is the one real boy. Each knows he must be wrong about this, but he can't feel how. The fish and the fisherman, the pilot, the princess, the fireman, and the ones on fire. Care. Dress like you care. Eat like you care. Care like you care. You don't think apples just grow on trees, do you? A fish taps a clam against a bony knob of coral to crack its shell, which demonstrates intelligence, yes, but is the fish pleased with itself? Alone in your crib, you form syllables. Are you happy when one is like another? Add yourself to yourself. Now you have someone. Where will you spend eternity? How would you describe a God who could use magic but doesn't? Who prefers elaborate widgets and toggles, seconds toppling one by one, the careful recording of endless instructions? We're riveted by the hell show. The devil plays a huckster. What will he come out with next? Demons banished for dramatic effect are brought back to lobby for poisoning children. We can't believe they let us watch. In fact, they make us. Speculative fiction. The idea that producing a string of nonsense syllables while pointing toward an object may cause that object to change is common in children on the verge of language. The idea that force exists only as an interaction between objects, while an object is a kind of kink in a force field. The idea that if one survives X number of years, one will live to see how things turn out, or even that things end well. In the future, we will face new problems. How will we represent the variety of human types once all the large animals are gone? As sly as a mother? As hungry as an orphan? Costumes. Man in pirate getup, slumped in a folding chair on a corner by the on-ramp, half seen by drivers angling for position. On the seventh day, we rested, surrounded by lakes of pig effluent, dunes of coal ash. By that time, it was late summer. Soon we would scare ourselves a little and give thanks. Just when we were sick of our appetites, our choices, the children came along and presented them in miniature, not as monsters, but as pets we'd want to feed. I have children in my life now. Understandings. To convey great effort and mild reluctance, one groans briefly when sitting up in bed. This is sometimes known as prayer. Ignore the wind chimes, they're a bad example. To stand beneath or walk behind to comprehend, to grab wildly at surrounding objects. Some grab at attention by quipping, "I don't care." Others sit in corners, closely watching their fingers. We fill the world with selfie avatars, and more children refuse to recognize their names. Now see, don't worry, we have armies of showrunners writing our dreams, ones where we're featured as skilled apparatchiks facing credible threats that appear and disappear like clockwork, leaving no apparent damage. It was all one to me, all pain, pleasure, all squirmy life, death, until your head broke the surface and looked backward and forward. Now see what you've done. All right, and now I'm going to read a few poems that are even newer from a newer manuscript. Hang on. Domestic as an empty shopping cart parked on a ledge above a freeway. Artifactual as an acorn barnacle. What is the purpose of barnacles? People ask the internet. Barnacles are filter feeders. They're fish tank decor. A plaque of barnacles on top of a toilet. This cluster of brittle puckers clinging to its old idea. These craters striped pale lavender for some unlikely eye. Vultures. A product can be authentic, an object cannot. This presents a problem. An identity can be authentic, an experience cannot. How was your sleep experience? Asks Marriott. Praise or blame is the only legitimate response. Vultures wheel over Miami. A sign that appears day after day is not a sign. The library boasts a fine collection of books written in private languages. Identity is made of select experiences. If you are genuinely sick, the leaves recede and the flickering holes between them come forward. Not angels, but unnamed objects. Cathexis. When we say the world is haunted, we mean untranslated, as yet. A cathexis is a catch basin in English, a result of draining here off into there. Starbucks' billion plastic straws are green. I know the leaves are whispering, "Tell me what my mother meant." The news. We wanted to tell someone everything, or everyone something. How large and limp the leaves were in the half-sun. But what is half-sun, finally? We'd been relaxing protections in our sleep again, it seemed. Now we were fewer. Some imagine St. Peter as a special concierge or a supercomputer listening. Did he listen to what he must already know, hearing only ones and zeros, pluses and minuses? Was that at least something? Over and over, first one tall stalk, and then its twin dips westward and recovers. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Notice, gesture used to ward off trouble became cheerful waving. There was so much looming and vanishing to take note of, always. We felt like play actors before we knew what we were about, and after. Turns out the mummy's curse is real. You pump thick death out of the ground and burn it, it kills you. But in all the movies, curses are a cheap plot trick. The doofus who can't read the hieroglyph dies first, and no one misses him, them. We were born yesterday. We're sorry. The music. Costume jewelry is what we once called this elaborate pendant of glass beads on the middle-aged blonde leaning against the Safeway, smoking angrily, 3 feet from a fleshy woman in fetal position on the concrete, where 2 small girls walk backwards, shoulder to shoulder, squealing. By pulsing bars of music, make as if to reconsider. Okay, just in case we all are eager to get to dinner, just 3 more. Oh, everything. Everything reminds us of sex, the way sex reminds us of everything. It's not. An apricot, perhaps, or the sunset's bridesmaid chiffon. All fricatives, the dimpled grassy hills west of the San Joaquin, the way nothing is quite true and everything bears repeating. The steps. I take a step back and it's like dancing. But what would it mean to return to my roots? Is that what the flowers do in September? Kids earn money and love by being themselves on YouTube. It only works if it's authentic. Was it better when enthusiasms had objects, such as distant wars or tulips? Now we pay attention to attention. Take a step back and it's like dancing. What would it mean for attention to be empty as a phrase repeated too often? And lastly, riddance. Okay, we've rendered the rendition. How often? What were we trying to get rid of? We exposed the homeless character of desire to the weather. Shall we talk about the weather? Worsening 4 times faster than expected, 8 times, until the joy of pattern recognition kicks in, until the crest of the next ridge is what remains of division. Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Rae. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Matthew. And thank all of you for coming out on this very warm night. Buy a book, talk to the poet and poets, and come back on Monday, the 7th of October, to hear Sawako Nakayasu will be reading here in the series as well. So, good night.